Welcome to Imagine Publishing, an imprint of Charlesbridge. Thanks so much for joining us today for our 2020 and Spring 2021 Book Buzz. Enjoy! First up, Borrowing Life by Shelley Fraser Mickle. This book was released in April of 2020. From the horrors of war, life-saving discoveries were made that have impacted lives for over 65 years. Best-selling author Jill McCorkle calls this book a beautiful tribute to medical science as well as to humanity. Performed at Boston's Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in 1954, the first successful kidney transplant was the culmination of years of grit, compassion, and the pursuit of excellence by a remarkable medical team. Drawing on the lives of these members of the greatest generation, Borrowing Life creates a compelling narrative that begins in wartime and tracks decades of ups and downs, personal and professional, of these inspiring men as they pursued a goal that has benefited and continues to benefit humankind in so many ways. In World War II, when he helped save the life of a badly burned pilot with a skin graft from a cadaver, Dr. Joe Murray began the journey towards saving patients suffering from organ failure by borrowing life through the gift of a healthy organ from a donor. For over a decade, he and his colleagues pursued that dream, overcoming failure, trusting in science, and spurred by their belief that the fantasy of transplantation could become a reality. Today, about 80 organ transplants are performed daily throughout the world, a direct result of this historic and dramatic event. Award-winning author Shelley Fraser Mickle tells the story with remarkable sympathy, a result not just of her powerful storytelling ability, but also her own experience, as her husband trained under the surgeons who achieved this modern wonder. She knew these men personally and brings their hearts and minds to life with sensitivity and respect. She says, "Throughout my research, I was bombarded each day with fat slices of wonder. The result is a tale of adventure, compassion, and the accomplishment of a medical miracle." Join us later today to meet Shelley Fraser Mickle in our booth at 2:15 in conversation with editor Kevin Stevens. From veteran sports writer Bob Schron comes Taking a Knee, Taking a Stand, African American Athletes and the Fight for Social Justice. This book was released in June of 2020 and includes a foreword by New England Patriots captain Devin McCourty. On and off the field, African American athletes have a long and challenging history of advancing the cause of social justice. This book celebrates the contributions of the many prominent athletes who risked their careers to stand up for their rights. Muhammad Ali refused to submit to the draft. Wilma Rudolph retired early from her track career to campaign for civil rights. Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem to protest police brutality. In the nationalist-infused atmosphere of the American sports stadiums, these daring and earnest protests are true acts of courage. Taking a Knee, Taking a Stand bears witness to this tradition and anchors it in the context of broader social movements. Bob Costas, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, says of this book, "The history of Black athletes using their prominence to take principled stands is long and admirable. In Taking a Knee, Taking a Stand, Bob Schron provides a thoughtful and comprehensive look at that history." And from Samuel G. Friedman, professor of Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, he says, "At a time when African Americans in sports have been leaders in the quest for a more just and equitable nation, Bob Schron has written a fluent and knowledgeable history of their political activism over nearly a century. This book is a valuable addition to the smart sports fans' bookshelf." And from NBC Sports' Kyle Draper, Taking a Knee, Taking a Stand is not just a book. It's a history lesson documenting the courageous path athletes from yesteryear to today have traveled in the name of social justice and racial equality. For more than a century, sports and politics have intersected, helping to shape this great country of ours. From Jesse Owens to Muhammad Ali to Colin Kaepernick and LeBron James, athletes have put their reputations and in some cases lives on the line to make a difference. Bob Schron does an excellent job detailing the impact of those social justice warriors and why it is still just as important today for athletes to take a stand instead of just shutting up and dribbling. Birder on Berry Lane, 3 acres, 12 months, thousands of birds, by Robert Tugayas, with illustrations by Mark Sanzier. This book released in March of 2020. It's a month-by-month guide to the birds that flock to the peaceful New England backyard of a noted writer, birder, and naturalist. Brian Sullivan of Cornell University and author of Better Birding says, Birder on Berry Lane weaves a remarkably rich tapestry, describing many birds' lives around a single place and showing just how connected to them we can become. Robert Tugayas proves that if we look, we can see so much more than we think, even in our own backyards. Robert Tugayas' house on Berry Lane may look like a typical Connecticut suburban home, but as his fascinating year-long account reveals, its 3-acre backyard is teeming with nature's mysteries. Acutely sensitive to the activities of birds, Tugayas notes which species are present, which are breeding, and where their nests are. He identifies each species with its song and brings us on a journey of appreciation as we learn the wonders of bird migration, the sensitive interaction of birds with their habitat, and the hidden meaning of their call notes and songs. Intimate and acutely observed writing reveals the miracles of the ordinary and the subtle changes, season to season, of the ecosystem of the woods, streams, and meadow that make up the sprawling backyard on Berry Lane. We are led to consider, too, the dangers posed by the climate crisis and unthinking human development. The quietly powerful writing tunes our senses to the changes of the seasons, the return of warblers in spring, geese flying south in the fall, all happening on time as they have for eons. Beautifully illustrated with 25 line drawings, Birder on Berry Lane is a book of sublime simplicity that teaches an appreciation for what we commonly overlook. Next up, The Art of Protest, edited by Joe Rapon. This book released in March of 2020. From the suffragettes of the early 20th century to the upheavals of the 1960s and 70s to contemporary social media-driven demonstrations of dissent and resistance, this illustrative history features iconic art from the archives of Amnesty International, work by world-renowned artists, and spontaneous posters from short-lived print collectives and activists on the ground. The Art of Protest covers key campaigns, global and local, including the refugee and climate crises, women's empowerment, nuclear disarmament, LGBTQ activism, Black Lives Matter, and issues around war and the misuse of the world's resources. These are images that have pushed boundaries as they give voice to the marginalized and confront those who would deny people their rights to peace and equality. Presented in collaboration with Amnesty International, this stunning collection of more than 100 posters charts a visual journey across more than a century of political and social activism. Okay, jazz fans, I've got The Art of Jazz by renowned writer and broadcaster Alan Shipton. This book releases in October 2020. Everyone knows jazz is on the cutting edge of music, but how much do you know about its influence in the visual arts? With album covers that took inspiration from the avant-garde, jazz's primarily African American musicians and their producers sought to challenge and inspire listeners both musically and visually. As African American musicians developed jazz into the 20th century's major musical art form, its influence impacted artists such as Edward Elgar, Romare Bearden, Aaron Douglas, Norman Lewis, Picasso, Matisse, and more, crafting a fresh visual language for this new music. Arranged chronologically, each chapter covers a key period in jazz history, from the earliest days of the 20th century to today's postmodern jazz. Chapters begin with substantive introductions and present the evolution of jazz imagery in all its forms, mirroring the shifting nature of the music itself. With 2 authoritative features per chapter and over 300 images, The Art of Jazz is a significant contribution to the literature of this intrepid art form. Join us today at 9:30 a.m. to meet author Alan Shipton in conversation with editor Kevin Stevens. Organizations need to recognize the flaws in their meritocracy assumption and get on board to fix it. So say Kelly Watson and Jody Ecker-Detjen, co-founders and managing partners of Orange Grove Consulting, which helps large and small organizations implement operational change. In their new book, The Next Smart Step, they show that empowering women empowers everyone. The first step is understanding that gender balance is not a zero-sum game. The next SMART step is a clear, assured guide to understanding the challenge of gender imbalance, implementing solutions, and equipping readers with the tools we all need to ensure change that is positive and enduring. It is about all of us becoming leaders. The next SMART step builds on a positive reality, helping readers recognize and manage unconscious biases, see diversity as a 21st century skill, and work towards equal partnerships in the workplace. Gender equity is not only the right thing to do, it makes life better, workplace culture more diverse, opportunity more widely available, and organizations more successful. Join us today at 1:15 to hear from Jody and Kelly in conversation with editor Kevin Stevens. Ah, Boston, the city on a hill, the Athens of America, the cradle of liberty, the hub of the universe, not to mention the hub of innovation. Which brings me to our next book, Boston Made. From Revolution to Robotics, Innovations That Change the World by Dr. Robert M. Krim with Alan Earls. This is a fascinating look at how Boston became and remains a global center for innovation, told through 50 world-changing inventions. Since the 1600s, Boston has been at the forefront of world-changing innovation, from starting the country's first public school to becoming the first state to end slavery and giving birth to the telephone. Boston was the site of the first organ transplant, which we talked about earlier today, and more recent medical and biotech breakthroughs that have saved the lives of thousands. That's not to mention pioneering advances in everything from rockets to robotics. In total, Boston area inventors have contributed more than 400 standout social, scientific, and commercial innovations, and uncounted numbers that are less well known. Boston Made tells the absorbing stories of 50 of these and why they are no accident. In fact, fresh waves of innovation have brought the city back from 4 major economic collapses. Dr. Krim lays out a set of innovation drivers, including strong entrepreneurship, local funding, and networking. From boom to decline and back to boom, Boston has maintained an ability to reinvent and build anew. Dr. Krim with technologist Alan Earls have developed and outlined a new interpretation of how a resilient city has flourished. At a time when the national and global economy is reeling from pandemic shockwaves, the authors have laid out what a dynamic, world-class city has done in the face of adversity to find a fresh and successful path forward. Just keep climbing. That's what Jeff Belanger kept telling himself as he pushed himself to summit one of the highest mountains on Earth. After his brother-in-law Chris passed away, Jeff Belanger made the decision to take the trip of a lifetime in honor of him to summit Mount Kilimanjaro. But this trip was just as much to test himself and find clarity about his own life and goals. The Call of Kilimanjaro is a day-by-day record of Belanger's ascent to the peak of Africa's highest mountain. By turns contemplative and irreverent, joyful and thoughtful, boyish and wise, this is a memoir for the armchair traveler and those seeking spiritual refreshment. By example, Belanger teaches us to take stock of our accomplishments, eye the lofty goals we've placed in front of ourselves, and push higher than we've ever dared, turning an honest eye toward past, present, and future, through the end of life and beyond. It's an honest and engaging account of one amateur hiker's journey to spiritual transformation as he climbs to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. Jeff Belanger is an author, adventurer, journalist, and one of the most visible explorers of the unexplained today. He is also the Emmy-nominated host, writer, and producer of the New England Legends series on PBS and the weekly New England Legends podcast. He's been a guest on hundreds of television and radio networks and programs, including History, Travel Channel, Biography, PBS, CBS Sunday Morning, NPR, BBC, Coast to Coast AM, and more and more. He's also a mainstay in library programming across the country. Jeff will be joining us today in our booth at 11:30 to give us a taste of his library presentations, and he'll also be on the self-help and inspiration panel later today at 4 p.m. The Call of Kilimanjaro, Finding Hope Above the Clouds, will release in March 2021. And lastly, In Defense of Liberal Democracy, What We Need to Do to Heal a Divided America. High-profile economist Manuel Hines merges expert historical, political, and economic analysis and shows how our recent technological revolution, what he calls the connectivity revolution, has led to a crisis of divisiveness. Assessing the angry rhetoric and polarization of current political and social discourse in the U.S., Hines considers the dangers of seeking populist solutions to our current upheaval and shows how the traditions and institutions of liberal democracy restored prosperity, freedom, and equity during the Industrial Revolution, the Great Depression, and other periods of political instability. Hines examines our national past and present, up to and including the 2020 presidential election, to illustrate how current events can be as dramatic as any historical legacy in warning us of the danger of abandoning our democratic principles. In Defense of Liberal Democracy takes a hard look at the divisions that scar America today. It is a bold reaffirmation of the liberal democratic principles that have carried our nation through each crisis in its history, and can do so again. Manuel Hines is El Salvador's former finance minister and winner of the Manhattan Institute's Hayek Prize. He has worked with the World Bank in the public and private sector and as a consultant to international institutions and governments on issues related to the financial system. He's the author of The Triumph of the Flexible Society, Money, Markets and Sovereignty, and Playing Monopoly with the Devil. In Defense of Liberal Democracy releases in April 2021. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please feel free to poke around our booth and check out what we've got. I do have some downloadable digital galleys for you today, including some of the books that we've talked about. Check out our readers group guides, download our catalogs, and don't forget to enter to win the Imagine 2020 list. Click on Chat with the Staff if you have any questions today. And please follow us on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Check out what we've got at imaginebooks.net. And if you have any questions afterwards, please contact us at books@charlesbridge.com. And please note, Imagine Books are distributed by Penguin Random House. Thanks so much. Enjoy Day of Dialogue.